$15 million. The hackers had encrypted everything: customer records, financial systems, even the backup servers. My former CEO was on the phone, voice shaking. "Roger, we need you back immediately." 3 days earlier, those same executives told me my cybersecurity methods were legacy thinking. Funny how legacy thinking suddenly became essential when their modern security failed catastrophically. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how a 54-year-old cybersecurity engineer became the most expensive lesson his company ever learned just by walking away when they decided experience didn't matter anymore. My name is Roger Mitchell. I've spent the last 18 years keeping digital wolves away from corporate doors. Before that, I did the same thing for the Air Force, protecting classified networks from foreign adversaries who never slept and never gave up. I learned early that security isn't about the fanciest tools or the latest buzzwords. It's about understanding how systems really work, what can go wrong, and building defenses that hold when everything else falls apart. I joined Cybercore Industries right after my military discharge in 2006. Back then, it was a mid-sized company that provided network security for regional businesses. Nothing glamorous, but steady work protecting payroll systems, customer databases, and the kind of infrastructure that keeps the lights on. The founders understood that downtime meant lost money, and lost data meant lost trust. They paid me fairly to make sure neither happened. For 18 years, I built their security architecture from the ground up. Every firewall rule, every access control, every monitoring protocol that kept their clients safe. I documented everything in detailed runbooks, trained junior engineers on proper incident response, and created security procedures that turned potential disasters into minor inconveniences. When new threats emerged, I adapted our defenses. When regulations changed, I ensured compliance. When executives asked if we were secure, I could point to metrics that proved it. The company grew steadily under my watch. Regional clients became national accounts. Mid-size contracts became enterprise deals. Revenue climbed from $50 million to over $300 million annually. Along the way, the original founders retired wealthy and sold to Tech Global Consortium, a larger technology holding company. New ownership meant new leadership. And those leaders had very different ideas about what made a security program valuable. The new CEO, Brad Coleman, came from a Silicon Valley background where disruption was the highest virtue and traditional approaches were obstacles to innovation. He brought in fresh executive blood, including a chief security officer named Justin Walsh. Justin was 26 years old, Stanford MBA with a cybersecurity bootcamp certificate, and exactly zero experience managing an actual security breach. But he had impressive slides about AI-driven security and automated threat response that made the board feel cutting edge. Within 6 months of Justin's arrival, he started questioning every protocol I'd built over nearly 2 decades. Why did we need manual monitoring when machine learning algorithms could detect threats faster? Why maintain separate access controls for legacy systems when single sign-on was more user-friendly? Why keep detailed documentation when automated tools could figure out system dependencies on the fly? Why employ a full incident response team when smart software could handle most security events automatically? I tried explaining that cybersecurity isn't just about detection speed or user convenience. It's about understanding attack vectors that algorithms miss, maintaining redundant controls when primary systems fail, and having experienced human judgment available when automated responses make situations worse. I showed him incident reports from other companies where over-reliance on automation had turned minor intrusions into major data breaches. I walked him through our legacy client management systems, explaining why they needed specialized monitoring that standard AI tools couldn't provide. Justin's response was always the same polite dismissal. That's legacy thinking, Roger. Modern security is about embracing new technologies and methodologies, not clinging to outdated approaches that don't scale with our growth trajectory. The breaking point came during our annual security review in March. Brad and the entire executive team gathered to assess our cybersecurity posture and budget allocation for the coming fiscal year. I presented my usual comprehensive report: threat landscape analysis, vulnerability assessments, incident response metrics, and detailed recommendations backed by 18 years of protecting the company. Everything was supported by data, documentation, and real-world examples of why each security measure existed. Then Justin presented his security modernization initiative. The presentation was polished and impressive, full of sleek slides, AI-powered dashboards, and budget projections that made the CFO smile. His proposal fundamentally restructured our entire security approach. eliminate manual oversight protocols, consolidate access controls across all systems, reduce our incident response team from 5 experienced engineers to 2 security analysts who would primarily manage automated detection systems and redirect budget from legacy monitoring to next-generation threat intelligence platforms. The traditional approach worked fine when we were a smaller regional company, Justin explained to the room with practiced confidence. But we're operating at enterprise scale now. We need security architecture that grows with our business, not methods that require constant human intervention and create operational bottlenecks. Brad nodded approvingly. Alex Parker, the CFO, was clearly pleased with the proposed budget reductions. Other executives asked about implementation timelines and cost projections. The room buzzed with enthusiasm for modernization and efficiency gains. Nobody asked what happened if the automated systems failed during an actual attack. Nobody questioned what would happen when sophisticated attackers used social engineering tactics that bypassed algorithmic detection. Nobody wondered who would maintain institutional knowledge about our legacy client systems that still processed millions of dollars in daily transactions. I raised my hand during the Q&A session. What's our fallback plan if the AI detection misses something sophisticated? What happens when attackers use social engineering that bypasses automated controls? Who maintains institutional knowledge about our legacy systems that still handle critical client data processing? The room went uncomfortably quiet. Justin smiled with the kind of condescending patience reserved for people who just don't get it. Roger, I understand that change can be uncomfortable, especially for professionals who've built their careers around older methodologies. But we can't let fear of new technology prevent us from modernizing our security posture. These AI systems are designed by teams of experts who understand current threat landscapes better than any individual engineer, no matter how experienced. I've been protecting networks since before these experts graduated from college, I said, keeping my voice level. I've seen what happens when companies trust automation over human judgment. Sometimes the most sophisticated attacks are also the simplest ones, and algorithms miss patterns that experienced eyes catch immediately. Brad intervened before the discussion could escalate further. Roger, we genuinely appreciate your dedication and institutional knowledge, but Justin's absolutely right about the modernization imperative. We're implementing the new security framework starting next quarter, and I'm confident you'll adapt to the enhanced systems just fine. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in HR with Linda Foster, reviewing what they called my performance development plan. The company had quietly restructured the cybersecurity department, making me a senior analyst reporting to Justin instead of maintaining my previous role as department head. My salary was frozen pending what they termed successful transition to contemporary methodologies. The final insult was mandatory training on current security practices taught by consultants who were younger than my professional experience in the field. Roger, Linda said, sliding papers across the table with practiced corporate sympathy. We're really committed to helping you grow into a more collaborative role within our modernized security team. Justin has identified several areas where your skills could be better utilized in support of our new strategic direction. I looked at the development plan. It read like a comprehensive demotion wrapped in HR-approved language. Reduced responsibilities, eliminated decision-making authority, mandatory supervision by someone who'd never actually handled a real security crisis, and retraining on fundamentals I'd been practicing since Justin was in middle school. What happens if I don't sign this? I asked directly. Linda's practiced professional smile faltered slightly. Well, we'd have to consider whether your current position aligns with our evolving business needs and organizational structure. I pulled out my resignation letter, already prepared and signed that morning. Then let me save everyone some time. My position no longer aligns with your business needs, and your business no longer aligns with my professional standards. I handed her the letter across the same table, where they'd just tried to demote me. Effective immediately. Linda stared at the resignation letter like it contained classified information. Roger, you really don't have to make this decision right now. Think about your benefits package, your retirement timeline, your accumulated vacation time. We can definitely work something out that's mutually beneficial. I've been thinking about it for 3 months, I said, standing up. You've made it crystal clear that 18 years of experience doesn't matter here anymore. I believe you completely. Good luck with your modernized security program. I collected my personal coffee mug, the small cactus plant from my desk, and most importantly, my personal incident response notebook, 18 years of handwritten entries documenting every security event, every near miss, every weird system quirk that had never made it into official documentation. By 3:00 p.m., my access badge was deactivated. By 3:15 p.m., I was driving away from Cybercore Industries for the last time as an employee. I spent the next 3 days working on home improvement projects and updating my LinkedIn profile. The piece was remarkable. No 2 a.m. alerts about suspicious network activity. No meetings about compliance frameworks. No explaining why certain legacy systems required manual oversight to people who'd never seen a real cyber attack. Friday evening, I was installing a new ham radio antenna when my phone started buzzing with missed calls. Gary Pierce, the VP of Technology who'd remained diplomatically silent during my final months, had called 6 times in an hour. Steve Caldwell from Network Operations left increasingly urgent voicemails. Even Linda from HR sent a text message, "Roger, please call back immediately. We have an emergency situation developing." I ignored them all and continued working on the antenna installation. Around 7 p.m., a car pulled quickly into my driveway. Deanna Turner, Brad's executive assistant, got out looking completely frazzled, a stark contrast to her usual polished corporate appearance. "Roger, thank God you're home," she said, practically running across my lawn. "Brad needs to speak with you immediately. We have a critical security incident in progress." "No," I corrected her. "You have a critical security incident. I don't work at Cybercore anymore, remember? This isn't about corporate politics or organizational changes," she said desperately. "Someone has breached our network systems. They're demanding $15 million in ransom and threatening to release all our client data publicly. Justin's team can't contain it, and they can't figure out how the attackers got in." I set down my antenna tools and looked at her. "What kind of breach are we talking about?" "Ransomware attack. Started late Friday afternoon when most people had already left for the weekend. It spread through our legacy client management systems, the ones you always said needed special monitoring protocols. The automated detection systems completely missed it because the attack came through social engineering emails targeting our summer interns." I almost smiled at the bitter irony. Social engineering attacks on inexperienced temporary workers, spreading through legacy systems that Justin's AI couldn't properly monitor, attacking on a weekend when only skeleton crews were working. It was exactly the attack scenario I'd outlined in security memos that management had filed under legacy thinking for the past 2 years. "Where's Justin and his modernized security team?" I asked. "He's been working around the clock since Friday night, but the attackers seem to know our systems better than we do. They bypassed every automated control, and now they're demanding payment within 72 hours or everything gets released publicly. And Brad wants me to come in and fix what your modernized security couldn't prevent," I asked. Diana nodded desperately. "He's authorized consultant rates. Whatever you normally charge for emergency response work, I don't have normal consultant rates," I said. "I've never needed them before. I was a salaried employee until 3 days ago. By Monday morning, the full scope of the breach was becoming clear, and it was worse than anyone had initially realized. The attackers had gained access to customer records for 3.2 million accounts, including social security numbers, credit card information, banking details, and personal financial data. They'd systematically encrypted critical business systems and backup servers, then demanded $15 million within 72 hours or everything would be released publicly on the dark web. The FBI cybercrime unit was already involved and had agents on site. State attorneys general from 6 different states were launching parallel investigations. Cybercore's stock price had dropped 38% in pre-market trading as news of the breach spread. Class action law firms were already filing lawsuits on behalf of affected customers, and the company's legal department was in full crisis mode. Brad called my personal number at 8:30 a.m. His voice was strained and exhausted. "Roger, I know things didn't end well between us last week, but we desperately need your help. This attack is exactly the kind of scenario you always warned us about. Name your price for emergency consultation." "It's not about money, Brad," I said. "It's about the fact that you had 18 years of institutional knowledge protecting your systems and you actively decided it wasn't worth keeping. We made serious mistakes in how we handled the transition," he admitted. "We should have listened more carefully to your concerns about the modernization timeline and methodology. You didn't make mistakes," I corrected him. "You made deliberate choices. You chose to prioritize budget savings over security expertise. You chose to trust automation over experienced human judgment. You chose to dismiss institutional knowledge in favor of impressive credentials and modern buzzwords." There was a long pause before Brad responded. "What will it take to get you back, even temporarily?" I thought about it carefully. "I'll consult on incident response at $500 per hour, minimum 40-hour commitment payable in advance." But I want to be absolutely clear about something. I won't be responsible for fixing fundamental problems that could have been prevented if you'd maintained the security architecture you already had. The next 48 hours were controlled chaos. Working closely with Steve Caldwell and the FBI cybercrime team, we methodically traced the attack vector back to exactly what I'd predicted in multiple security memos over the past 2 years. The breach had started with sophisticated social engineering emails targeting the summer intern program, college students with elevated network access under Justin's streamlined security model that eliminated what he'd called unnecessary access barriers. The attackers had spent nearly 3 weeks quietly mapping internal systems, identifying legacy vulnerabilities that automated monitoring couldn't detect, and establishing persistent backdoors in client management systems. Justin's AI-driven security platform had failed catastrophically at every critical decision point. The consolidated access controls made lateral movement trivially easy once attackers gained initial network access. The reduced monitoring team had missed obvious early warning signs that my manual oversight protocols would have caught within hours. The elimination of redundant security measures meant no backup detection systems activated when primary defenses failed. We managed to contain the breach and restore most critical systems from offline backup archives, but the damage to CyberCore was comprehensive and irreversible. The company faced $125 million in direct costs, ransom negotiation expenses, complete system recovery and rebuilding, legal fees for multiple lawsuits, and regulatory fines from state and federal agencies. The reputational damage was incalculable in an industry where trust is everything. Major enterprise clients began terminating their contracts within weeks. New business development stalled completely as prospects questioned the company's ability to protect their data. CyberCore's valuation collapsed as investors fled a company that had demonstrably failed at its core competency. Insurance companies disputed coverage claims, arguing that the breach was preventable based on ignored security recommendations. Within 6 months, the entire executive team had been forced out. Brad resigned under intense board pressure. Alex Parker, the CFO who'd been so enthusiastic about budget cuts, stepped down to pursue other opportunities. Justin quietly left for what was described as a strategic advisory role at a startup in the financial technology sector, completely different from cybersecurity. The board brought in crisis management consultants and hired an entirely new security leadership team, headed by someone with 25 years of hands-on incident response experience. They also implemented what they called institutional knowledge preservation protocols to ensure critical expertise could never again walk out the door with a single resignation. Carol Martinez, the board member who'd led the internal investigation into what went wrong, called me personally 6 months after the breach. "Roger, we owe you an apology that goes far beyond financial compensation. We've thoroughly reviewed your security recommendations from the past 3 years. And you'd specifically identified every single vulnerability the attackers exploited. You'd proposed detailed solutions for every failure point we experienced during the breach. We systematically ignored all of it because we thought we knew better." "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. "We're completely rebuilding our cybersecurity program from the ground up, and we want to do it properly this time. Would you consider serving as Chief Security Advisor to the board? We're implementing comprehensive new policies that prioritize institutional knowledge and hands-on experience over theoretical credentials. We want to make absolutely certain we never lose critical expertise this catastrophically again." The advisory offer was generous. The scope was professionally interesting, and most importantly, it was respectful of what I brought to the table. But more than that, it represented a genuine opportunity to help build something better from the rubble of corporate arrogance. "I'll think about it seriously," I said. I took the advisory role, not because I needed the income from consulting fees, but because I wanted to be part of building something genuinely better from the wreckage of corporate short-sightedness. Under Carol's leadership and the new board's direction, CyberCore slowly rebuilt itself with hard-earned wisdom. They hired a new chief technology officer who actually understood systems architecture at a fundamental level. They created a technical expertise track that compensated senior engineers on par with executive management. They documented everything comprehensively and implemented redundant knowledge-sharing protocols. Most importantly, they learned to genuinely value the people who kept the digital lights on rather than treating them as interchangeable cost centers to be optimized away. 2 years later, I was having coffee with Steve Caldwell, who'd been promoted to Director of Network Operations after proving his competence during the crisis response. "You know what's really interesting?" Steve said, stirring sugar into his cup. "Justin reached out to me last month asking if we had any open positions. Said he'd learned a tremendous amount about cybersecurity implementation during his time in the financial technology sector and wanted to get back into hands-on technical work. What did you tell him? I asked, genuinely curious. That we had an entry-level security analyst position available, but it required completing 2 full years of supervised training under senior engineers before any independent responsibilities. No shortcuts based on educational credentials or previous management experience. He'd have to demonstrate actual technical competency through real incident response work and system administration. How did he take that news? He starts next month. Took a 45% pay cut compared to his previous position, but he seems genuinely committed to learning how security actually works instead of just how it looks in PowerPoint presentations. I smiled at that. Some people do eventually learn, but usually only after reality teaches them lessons that business school case studies simply can't convey. The most satisfying part of the whole experience wasn't the consulting fees or the professional vindication, though both were certainly welcome. It was knowing that every time CyberCore's security team referenced their comprehensive monitoring protocols, every time they maintained redundant controls for critical legacy systems, every time they hired experienced engineers over impressive MBA credentials, they were building on the foundation of an expensive lesson I'd taught them, simply by walking away when they decided expertise was disposable. The industry took notice of what had happened at CyberCore. I started receiving invitations to speak at cybersecurity conferences about institutional knowledge preservation and the hidden costs of security automation. Other companies began reaching out for consultation on building sustainable security programs that valued experience alongside innovation. My speaking calendar filled up with engagements at organizations that wanted to avoid learning the same $125 million lesson. One particular conference presentation became something of a legend in cybersecurity circles. I titled it, Legacy Thinking: Why Experience Matters More Than Ever in Modern Security. The audience was primarily CTOs and security executives from Fortune 500 companies, many dealing with similar pressures to modernize their security operations. I started with a simple question. How much would you pay to prevent a $125 million security breach? Then I walked through the CyberCore case study, explaining exactly how prioritizing credentials over competency, automation over human judgment, and cost savings over comprehensive security had created every vulnerability the attackers exploited. The response was overwhelming. Companies that had been planning similar modernization initiatives quietly shelved them. Security executives who'd been pressured to reduce experienced staff suddenly found budget approval for retention programs. The presentation was shared widely in cybersecurity leadership circles and became required viewing for several corporate board audit committees. I also established a mentoring program for experienced cybersecurity professionals facing similar age discrimination and credential bias. Too many talented engineers were being pushed out of organizations that couldn't distinguish between outdated tools and invaluable expertise. The program connected these professionals with companies that had learned to value institutional knowledge, creating better outcomes for everyone involved. My personal financial situation improved dramatically as well. The consulting work, speaking engagements, and advisory roles provided income that far exceeded what I'd been earning as a salaried employee. More importantly, I was finally working with organizations that respected what I brought to the table, rather than treating my experience as an obstacle to progress. But perhaps the most rewarding aspect was the feedback from other security professionals who'd found themselves in similar situations. I received dozens of emails from engineers who'd been told their methods were outdated, their experience was irrelevant, or their salaries were too high compared to fresh graduates. Many had been inspired to stand up for their professional worth rather than accepting devaluation quietly. One email particularly stood out. It was from a 58-year-old network architect in Ohio who'd been facing pressure to train his own replacement, a recent graduate with impressive academic credentials but no practical experience. After reading about the CyberCore incident, he'd presented his own company's board with a detailed analysis of what institutional knowledge meant to their security posture. Instead of being replaced, he was promoted to chief security officer and given budget authority to build a team that balanced experience with innovation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is demonstrate what your knowledge was worth by letting people experience what happens when you take it away. CyberCore's executives wanted me to understand why my 18 years of experience didn't justify higher compensation than a recent graduate with the right degree. By the end of that first week after the breach, they understood perfectly why experience justifies premium compensation and genuine respect. The sweet irony wasn't demanding they pay me emergency consulting rates, though I certainly earned every dollar. It wasn't watching executives lose their jobs, though there was definite satisfaction in seeing accountability applied to decision makers. It was knowing that every time they looked at their rebuilt security systems, every time they referenced their new institutional knowledge preservation protocols, every time they promoted a technical expert to senior leadership based on competency rather than credentials, they were building on the foundation of a lesson I'd taught them by simply walking away. Thanks for listening. Trust me, there are plenty more stories where that came from, and most of them have the same moral. Never underestimate the value of experience, and always remember that respect is earned through results, not titles.